see they provide me with everything here, some water, a clock that's not working, so I'm not sure how long they want me to speak here.
This working.
Thank you so much, my dear sister-in-law, Rasha Chava. Thanks, Mary. So you really want to get out of here quick. For that wonderful introduction, it's really nice to have a sister-in-law introduce you. She can say things that sometimes are not really 100% as they should be, but they're nice to hear anyway. And thanks so much for saying that. And I'd also like to thank Rabbi Fuchs, who asked me to come to speak to this wonderful Ohel group, which is notorious and known all over the world in so many branches that you don't even know about, that sprouted out of the inspiration that this Ohel group has in so many people in so many different places. I know my daughter in Yechiel and other places and other people. And speaking to such a wonderful group of Noshim Tzedkonias is really very, very humbling for me, because the schus of the tefillas and the Torah that go out of this home is not only for the people who say it, but also for Gans Klal Yisrael, and of course the host, Dr. and Mrs. Martin, who I remember speaking here many times before. It was upstairs, not here. It was the men's division for the great Rabbi, so sagen sind in stark, aber wir zurück, the Shema Emunim, and we know that this is Shema Omeinim, and Shema Emunim and Shema Omeinim are the same. And the truth is, when Renee told me how to get here, my GPS was not exactly programmed correctly, but she said to me, you'll find the big house. Now, that's not really a landmark here, big house. But she told me the two pillars that are there. Ah, a house with pillars that the world stands on. Well, that's something else. You know, the Gemara tells himself in Megillah that the Beis HaMikdash was called the Bayis HaGodol. Shweki made it famous with the song, Vala Bayis HaGodol, Rachem. We know it's called Bayis HaGodol, so Be'esh. And the Gemara asks, why is it called Bayis HaGodol? It's not for its beautiful architectural beauty and grandness. It's not for its large, tremendous site. It's because it's a makom shemegadlim by Torah and megadlim by Tefillah. It's a place where you grow, you cultivate Torah, and you cultivate Tefillah. And therefore, every house, and especially this house, which is open 24/7 for Torah, for Tefillah, for mitzvahs and Maasim Tovim, is called a Bayis HaGodol. You don't have to look in the backwoods of Lawrence for a huge house and an acre of land. But right here, this is a Bayis HaGodol, and every one of you, as big or as small as your house is, has a Bayis HaGodol. If it has those ingredients, which is Torah, which is Chesed, you open up your house to other people, to strangers, to mitzvahs and Maasim Tovim and tzedakahs, you daven and you learn there, it becomes a Bayis HaGodol. And as you know, Yeshaya Novi says, Ki beisi beis tefillah yikor l'chol ha'amin. My house is considered a prayer house to all the nations of the world. What did Yeshaya Novi mean by that? Because when people look at a Jewish house, they get confused. Is this a house or is this a shul? You daven here, you should daven in shul. You learn here, you should learn in the shul. You give tzedakah, you make parties here, you should do that in the shul. That's where it belongs. A goy would never think of that. And therefore Yeshaya Novi said, Ki beisi, my house, beis tefillah yikor l'chol ha'amin. A goy looks at it, he thinks, wow, this must be a religious place, this must be an institution of religion, this must be a shul. And that's the way to build the house, and that's the way the houses should be in Baruch Hashem, that this house is the Bayis HaGodol with the two pillars, Amudim, Sha'olam, Oimidam, Torah, and Avoy Legemilas Kasodim. Avoy Shalom helping that the Martins and everyone involved should be able to have the koyach and the strength to continue this until Mashiach comes in here. Amen. Today's topic, unleashing the fire in your soul. Very appropriate for the days of Elul, the days of awe, when we stand in supplication before the Rabbi Shalom, and we really want to kindle that fire within us, kindle that little spark that every neshama has in ways that we can benefit and become greater in Torah, in Tefillah, in Avodah, in everything that we do in preparation for these high holy days. And we know that Elul has many acronyms and many definitions. One of them is Ish L'Re'eu U'Matonos Le'Vyonim. Aleph Lamed Vav Lamed. Ish L'Re'eu, as it says in the Megillah, one to another, friendly to each other, U'Matonos Le'Vyonim, Tzedakos and Chesed Masim Tovim. And that's something that we have to excel on days like this, because the Schusim will help us. And also, Ani L'Doidi, V'Doidi Li. I am to my Rabbi Shalom, to my God, to my Creator, to my Father in heaven. And He in turn reflects that and is to me also, which is the inyan of Tefillah. The first one is Ben Odom L'Chaveroi, Ish L'Re'eu, Matonis L'Evyonim. And the second one, Ani L'Doidi, represents Ben Odom L'Mokam, between me and the Rabbi Shalom. And a person has to always be visual and conscious of those two tremendous pillars in Yesodus of Yiddishkeit. Bein Odom L'Chaveroi, Ubein Odom L'Mokam. One without the other doesn't work. It's a set, it's complete. And in order to deem in the Rabbi Shalom the way it should be, you have to have both of these placed, Bein Odom L'Chaveroi and Bein Odom L'Mokam. And what does it mean? Ish L'Re'eu Matonis L'Evyonim, understanding someone, being conscious of his needs and his wants, chas v'sholom, not trampling on him, his emotions, his feelings, and God forbid if you do, the yin of mechilas, the Rambam says that Yom Kippur is not mechapa, for averos ben odom lechavera ad she'yeratzes chavera, until he begs for mechila and the person is moichel him. Just recently, was a story with the Skalena Rebbe, sozusagen gesinnt in Stark, my Rabbi. A couple came to him and they didn't have children for a few years. And they asked the Rebbe for bracha. And the Rebbe took his hand and the Rebbe fell asleep on his hand, which is what the Rebbe usually does, because the avodah of the Rebbe is so great, he does not sleep much. My son told me that he spoke with his Einikul once, and he said to him, I know you are by your grandfather at night. Tell me how it works there. He says, well, let me tell you a story that happened yesterday. At 2:30, the last person with the kvittel had left in the morning, and the gaboim, there's 2 or 3 of them, were extremely exhausted. They were very tired, and they needed to go home. And they said to me, listen, Zayd didn't eat too much today. He didn't sleep at all. It's 2:30. Please make sure that he goes to sleep. No, he had a mission. He was going to do it. And as everybody left and they closed the door, he said to Zayd, Zayd, darf ein Schlufen? He says, what kind of Schlufen? What noch nicht ist gelernt? He says, take a look at your Gemara. Took out the Gemara and they learned for an hour. With drooping eyes, he says to Zayd again, Zayd, darf ein Schlufen? He says, Schlufen? Do you realize what I heard Sudas the whole day today? Go to sleep. Schneller take a Tillim. Let's say Tillim for Klal Yisrael. There was another hour of Tillim until finally he had an hour or 2 of sleep to wake up to the next day's rigorous Avodas Hashem. So he took his hand and he went to sleep, and the person who asked for the bracha was not exactly a chassid and couldn't understand this, and he said, oh boy, I'm finished. The Rebbe's sleeping on me, he's really not paying attention. And he was ready to go, and the Rebbe said, no, stay. And he stood, and the Rebbe woke up, and you should know that this happened once, a story also in Toronto, when the great Rabbi Reichman came to visit the Rebbe took his hand and fell asleep. And as he was sleeping on his hand, Moshe wrote a big check in the other hand, and they asked him, what is this? He said, anyone who can fall asleep and I hold my hands, he must be a tzaddik. I don't have to give him something. So, and he wakes up the Rebbe and he says to him, I'm sorry, I can't help you. He says, why not? He says, there's a big kitrik in heaven, a tremendous kitrik against you. And I can't help you. You did something. Something you did that you have to be masakin. I can't help you. The man goes home, he starts thinking and thinking and thinking, and he doesn't realize, he doesn't know, what did I do against anybody? What? Then he remembers. When he was young, he had a friend in the Smedlish, and they got into a fight. And they promised each other they would never talk to each other again. They really got hurt, both of them, and they would not talk to each other. And this is already 35 years later, and what do we do? Sorry, about 15 years later, it wasn't 35, 15 years later, what do we do? He decided to look up for his friend where he lived, and the friend lived in a different state. I'm not going to say where it is because maybe somebody may recognize it. Lived in a different state. He goes to the state and he comes home. He lives in a palatial villa. Knocks on the door, and the servant comes out and says, "I'm sorry, but he's not here. Your friend who you're looking for, he'll be in tomorrow." So he checked into a motel. The next day he comes in, he opens the door, and sure enough, the friend is at the door looking at him, and he sees him, he thinks from it, and he slams the door in his face. "I don't want to see you." And the man knocks again, and he says, "Please, Moshe, open the door, I need to tell you something." He wouldn't open the door. He says, "Moshe, if you don't open the door and listen to what I have to say, you're going to be responsible for doers that are not going to come out of it." He hears such a thing, he opens the door, and he says to him, "Moshe, you remember the fight that we had? I really want you to be Michael. So many years have gone by, and I see I have children. I really want you to be Michael." Moshe takes a look at him and begins to cry. And Moshe says, "I too have no children. I want you to be Michael me, and I'll be Michael you." The next year, one had a son and one had a daughter. Now, I'm not sure of the sequel, if they're going to marry each other, but this is what it means. Ish lere'eyu umatonas levyonim. One to another, understanding. When it comes to El, you have to work on that mitzvah, on that midah of chesed, of understanding, and do the best you can. If you work chas v'sholom pegay on someone's covet, to ask for his mechila, ask for his forgiveness. The Rambam says, Yom Kippur is not mechapa achiratza until he begs his friend for forgiveness. And then there is, of course, beinodam u'makom. Between you and your Father in heaven, between you and your Creator, ani l'doidi v'doidi li, personal time, a wonderful special relationship. B'chol karei me'elav, whenever we call him, there's no special time where the Rebbeinu Shalom has to come to you. He's around here, he's with you, he's wherever you are. And the inyan of tefillah, which is so great, I don't have to tell you the greatness of tefillah. This Omen group personifies what tefillah means, what avodah means. You know, Rav Gifta, the tells of Rosh Yeshiva, Zochreinu Levrocha, was invited once in the winter to a Talmud's chasana. He was Musad the condition, the Talmud sent him 8 tickets for him and 7 of his friends to come. And they flew in, and of course it was the middle of a snowstorm, and they couldn't land at Kennedy, so they were diverted to Washington. And what could you do? It's time for the chasana, you can't help it. They got in touch with him. We were not going to make it for the chasana. They checked into some hotel at the airport, and it was time to daven Ma'ariv. There was 9 people. So Rav Gifta asked one of the managers there, "Please give us a room, a private room where we can daven." And the manager gave him a beautiful room and took care of it and stood on the side to listen to the davening. And he sees that they're not saying Kaddish before Baruch Hu. And he asked him, "Why don't you say Kaddish?" So Rav Gifta says, "Because there are only 9 people here. You need a quorum, you need 10. So he says, "I'm Jewish also, and I want to say Kaddish. Please be mitzvah for me, I want to say Kaddish too." And they took him as part of the minyan. Of course, he didn't know much of a Kaddish. He had to be helped by the boys, and he said it's Kaddish, and then he said it's Kaddish Yosem. And when he finished, he told Rav Gifta, "Let me tell you a story. My father passed away a few months ago, and I wasn't even at the Levaya. He passed away, he didn't have much shaykhs with him. My father came to meet the Cholim, and he said that there's a tremendous kittah on me because he can't have menucha unless I say Kaddish." And I said to him, "Daddy, I'm out here in Washington and Nowheresville. I don't have a minyan over here. I have no people. Where am I going to have Kaddish?" His father said to him, "I will send you a minyan tonight, and you say Kaddish." And he says to Rav Gifta, this is the minyan that my father sent me. And Rav Gifta said, I was wondering how I went to a chasana and I wound up in Washington at a minyan, exclusively 10 people, all by myself. It didn't take long until that man became a Baal Tshuva and his wife became a Baalis Tshuva, and they built Doros in Klal Yisrael. The Indian of Tefillah, the Indian of saying the Omein of what it accomplished, and especially for women. Women have such a tremendous koyach. By the Rabbi Shalom, tzaddikim used to come in on the Yom Neruim and they said, "Va begins with eile teir," and women, give me your tears, I need that in order to beseech the Rabbi Shalom. He should send Mechslicha, Mechila, Kapara for Klal Yisrael in bells. The Naral Rules, the Chodesh Baruch told me that in bells in the Haim years ago, when it came to Vayibim Soya, the women would cry and weep so loud that it took the Rebbe 15 minutes until he was able to continue, but nobody said a word, because those tears are so important. Those tears are so important, especially today, when everybody has something that he needs to be mispal from. Gezin, Nachas, Parnusa. Today, when the outside world, the zeitgeist around is full of kfira and things that take away the neshama from the tzmekor, from the kedusha and the tahara. Today, where people get lost in outer space, in cyberspace, and you can't even rescue them. There's a Klal Gadol, a rule in Nassau. They never would send up a spaceship unless they had another one in reserve, so in case anything goes wrong, they can pull them back and they can rescue them. Today, people get lost in cyberspace with no rescue ship, with nothing around, and the only thing that can help them is tefillah and tefillah v'amama. You know, Chana, the Gemara tells us in Masechet Brachos, we learn a lot of things that we daven in Shemoneh Esrei, what we do and we don't do from Chana. Chana went to Eli HaKohen, to Mishka Shila, and she was fouled for a child. She was barren, and she had no children. And she was davening. She davened a very quiet tefillah, a hartzige tefillah. Only her lips moved, but the voice wasn't there. Vayachshiveu Eli l'shikoyla. And Eli thought she was a drunkard, a wayward woman. He said to him, Spas nicht, Chana, the wife of a Gadol Ador, to act this way. And she said, Lo yadoini, says the Gemara, Lo odin ata bedova, Lo Ruach HaKodesh noch alecha. You're not saying this for Ruach HaKodesh. I am a stable, well-preserved, balanced, Yiddish Erlichkin. But the tzar that I have, it's so great. And therefore I'm beseeching in supplication to the Rabbi Shalom that I should have a child. And as soon as Eli HaKohen heard this, he took a step back and he gave her a bracha. Mikan, says the Gemara, if you're choshed b'ksherim, you have to give her a bracha. And he said, Chana, you will have a child next year, and you bring him into the Mishkan Shiloh. When he's 3 years old, he'll be there forever. He'll be there until Yovel, and that's when he was 52 when he passed away. When he was 3 years old, Chana fulfilled the promise, says the Gemara. She brought Shmuel to Mishkan Shiloh, and Shmuel was looking around and he sees Eli's looking for a kohen to shech kabbanos. So he asks, what do you need a kohen for? So they said, we need somebody to shech. So this little 3-year-old says, I learned in the Gemara by my Rabbi that the Kabbalah be'elech, from accepting the blood in the cup. From that point on, you need a kohen b'shchita. Is ksheira b'zom, even someone who's not a kohen can shech. Wow, a wonder child. Everybody looked and listened. A 3-year-old knows the halachas, and they came to Eli HaKohen's ears, and he said, "What is this all about?" And they told him, this child came and he knew the halacha. Eli said, wait a minute. He paskins by me in Besmedrish, by me in Mishkan Shiva. The halacha is, if you're moira hara b'fnei Rabbi, if you paskin in front of your Rabbi, chas v'shalom yechuyev bisa, and you want to be ma'anish. Little Shmuel comes Chana and throws herself to his feet, starts screaming, Elana zeh spalolti, I davened for this child. So Eli said, what are you worried about? I'll give you a better child. No, this is the child I want. I don't want anybody else. And you see, she won this debate with Eli, and Shmuel was left and became the Novi B'Yisrael, Anochi Haroya that we have. And maybe we have to understand, what was this debate between Hannah and Eli? She knew that this child came from the Rabbi Shalom. She knew it came from the tefillas of Eli HaKohen. She called him Shmuel. Kimi Hashem Sha'altiv Shomakel. The Rabbi Shalom listened to his tefillas. And if Eli wants to give her somebody better, then why wouldn't she accept it? Was this a type of emotional bond between a mother and a child? Or was it on a higher intellectual level, in a spiritual level? Eli HaKohen gave you this child, he wants to give you a bigger one. This child, unfortunately, has to be taken away. What was I heard from the Elul, Elul said, aside from the Elul said, Rabbi Emerson, there's two ways that you can accomplish if you can do over Rabbi Shalom. The first one is Tzaddik Moish Rabbi Shvachim Mekayim, Mi Moish Lugim, Tzaddik Moish Lugim, Tzaddik Moish Lugim. The Tzaddik is Moish controls whatever Rabbi Shalom's decrees are, and he can nullify them, and he can change them. The Tzaddik has that power. And then there's Tefillah. You can change the decrees from the Rabbi Shalom to Tefillah. Says the Pusha Rebbe, what's the difference between one and the other? And he said the following. Tzaddik Goiz V'Akadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim is for the moment. Yes, you have a problem, you solve the issue, and that's the end of it. Tefillah is not only now. This tefillah goes along with the child forever and ever and ever. As we say in Shemona Esra, V'zoiche chazdei ois, u'meivi goy livnei v'neim. He brings a geula of neighboring children, children's children. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky said, when the Iron Curtain fell down and you see there was a thirst for Torah, asked, how is that possible? 80 years of dullness, 80 years of pain, of apikosis, and there are people who quest and want and are looking for Torah in Yerushalayim. How is that possible? Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky said, it may be that the grandmother, the grandmother, years ago, when she stood by the Lechtzin and said, I want to see how this for my children, my grandchildren, that film might have skipped one generation and second generation, but it hit the third generation. And therefore we see such a resurgence, such a regrowth of Torah, a rejuvenation of Torah and Yiddish at that time. Tefillah is not only for now, it's the Zoichachas, the obvious, and therefore Hannah was timing and debating with Eli HaKohen. You want to give me a child with something goes in a Kodesh Baruch Hu Mekayim? Wonderful, have a better child. But who's going to protect the child? The child's not going to have the tefillahs of a mother. The child's not going to have the protection of a tahilin, of mitzvahs, of masim tuvim, of schusim. What's going to happen to that? I davened for this child, and that you can't give me that you can take away and never have it returned. Eli, look what you're doing. Yes, you'll give me somebody better, but that person will not be protected with the tefillahs of the mother. The tefillahs of the mother is so great. It's unbelievable. And as we know that this is something that not only helps for their own personal families, but also maybe go to the name, but also as a pillar in your soul that help Ganzklali so when the Abish takes a look at an aggregated form of all the tefillahs and masim tuvim that are going on. And of course, it's not only the tefillah, it's also the Torah. It's also building a shti, a house, based on the Yisodis of Torah. We know that when there is a house, that there is Torah, there's happiness, there's a simcha nefesh, there's a simcha sachayim, there's a purpose. Every day is blessed. And when the house is not blessed with the Torah, then unfortunately there isn't any of that menuchas nefesh, and there isn't any of that sipuk. And Baruch Hashem, when Noshins and communities get together, not only to daven, but also to learn. It's so important. It didn't used to be this way years ago. Years ago, women didn't have that opportunity to learn and to understand, to give over, and to control the Torah, and to go and give that ruach and that spirit, that warmth and kindness, that little spark, that inner fire that they have in their soul over to their children, and of course to their husbands and to their families and to the grandchildren. It was very difficult. I remember listening to the Hesped from Menashe, Menashe the Umva Rehuv, Zechatzate the Chodesh Baruch Menashe Umva, and he was maspid Rabbi Kaplan. I don't know if you know where Rabbi Kaplan was. Take a look at his Sara, 60 Sara he wrote, then he translated into English. He was a physicist. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 48. He was listed in the Who's Who as being one of the greatest physicists and potential of being one of the greatest physicists in the world. He dropped everything and went into Torah, went into Chinuch, and went into Sara, and unfortunately he passed at the early age of 48. And I was at Levi and I heard the Umva say, what is the greatness of Aryeh Kaplan? And he says the following. The Gemara Masechta Nedarim tells us the following. A person married his niece, and she wasn't matzachein by him. So he brought him to Rabbi Yechiel, and he says, I don't want anything to do with her. And Yechiel made and beautified her. And then he called back the husband, he said, is this the lady you're talking about? I said, no, that's not the lady I was talking about. Oh, in that case, take her home with you, and your whole nether is null and void, because obviously if you had known that this is not the kind of person that you're giving, you then would have made the nether, and then, at that moment, Rabbi Shmuel started to pine, to cry, and he said, saying, Jewish daughters are beautiful, the poorness, the fact that they can't afford to dress up, that makes them maneuverable. But that makes them not look so pretty. But the noise you saw are really nice, are really beautiful. And that is we have to understand. What did Rabbi Shmuel do? Says the Gemara. This lady had a wooden tooth, and she didn't look very nice with that. Rabbi Shmuel took money from his own pocket and made a gold tooth. Made her look beautiful and acceptable to her husband. And the Emerson asked our owner, what is this Gemara telling us? A personal episode between somebody doing a mitzvah, kindness, shalom bayis, then each time, stalker, paying for a golden tooth. Says Rabbi Menashe Klein, there was a time when the noise Yisrael had wooden teeth in their mouths, and they weren't looking that pretty. What does that mean? They didn't have the Torah. They couldn't open up, they couldn't decodify, not the Hebrew, not the Yiddish, not the Targum. All they had was goyish information all around them, and they weren't so pretty. Their mouths weren't that all the way it should be. And that's why in the Litta, people got married at the age of 40 because nobody wanted a bank fetcher. Nobody wanted somebody who sits and learns because they weren't much of the Torah, they didn't learn it, they didn't understand it. Comes up an area, Rabbi Kaplan's and puts a golden tooth in their mouths, opens up the world for them, shows them Sfarim that they can learn, they can understand, that they can excel in. Although boys Rabbi Shmuel cried and said, look what we could have accomplished with all the doors before. There were Yiddish fine Babas who would be moist and nefesh for their children and for Klal Yisrael, tzidkonius. Some women even took Britlich, as we know, the maiden of Ludmir, and the Baba Malka, Belzebub, Fresh Belzebub, but the general population didn't have that opportunity. And now, Baruch Hashem, they have golden teeth in their mouth. Their mouth sprouts with golden Torah, mitzvahs and masim Torah, which is so important. You know, you just davened on Shabbos, Yirotzon Fanecha, Shetachadish Alein Sachoydish Azel, Torah V'Rach L'Sita Lonu. This is the tefillah that the Rab said, says the Gemara Masechet Beruchos. Chaim Aruch, longevity. Chaim shall show peaceful life. Chaim shall do good life. Chaim shall Barucha, a blessed life. Chaim shall Parnosa. Chaim of wealth, Parnosa. The Chaim shall Chilutz Atzomus, of strength of the bones. What does that mean? You know what that means? We asked Rabbi Yechiel, and we see Rabbi Yechiel, send us someone, we see the Lord give us chaim of longevity. What is longevity worth unless it has accompanied with it pleasantness? I remember distinctly going to a nursing home with my father was officials, the Shabbos in the Svadish Yeshua. There was a Yid who was 105 years old. And he cried, he said, I have nothing to do in this world, I'm 105 years old. He says, you know how and you know why I'm so old? The reason is because I was at the Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim used to come to my city, to my town, and he used to come to sell the Sfarim that he had, the Mishnah Berurah, and the other Chofetz Chaim that he had. And I, as a young person with muscles, said to the old venerable Rav, who I didn't even know who he was, Rebbe, give me the peklech, I'm going to bring it up, I'm going to help you. And the Chofetz Chaim said, Zoslang leben mein Kind. He says, here I am, 105 great-great-grandchildren with nothing. They don't come to me. I have nothing to do with them. My life is just miserable at 105. He wasn't a Ben Torah. So therefore you ask for Chaim Aruchim. What kind of life is a life that is just living with nothing else to it? So we say, Chaim Shel Shalom, a peaceful life. Peace! There's supposed to be peace in Eretz Yisrael between the Jews and the Arabs. You know what that means. Peace just means no war, but there's nothing to it. And therefore we beg the Revelation, Chaim Shel Toiva. Give us a Toivatika life. You know what Toivatika life means? A Toivatika life is something that builds up and brings up and boosts up the family and gives them a purpose in life, gives them a happiness. Chaim Shel Toiva, ki lekach toiv nasat yelachem teloisi al tezoivi. Toivli toiva spichel al tezov v'chosev. Toiv is toiva. If you give us the life of toiva, then the longevity makes sense, then the peace makes sense, and then we can continue. There's going to be Chaim Shel Bracha, Chaim Shel Parnosa, Chaim Shel Chilutz Atzomus, for the illness and sickness that you'll be able to be saved from in the schus of this Torah. And it's so beautiful and so wonderful that not only is there an Amen group where everybody says Amen to each other's tefillahs, where there's an inning of tefillah, but there's Torah to accompany the basis, the yesodus of a Jewish family, of a Jewish home, the happiness, the greatness, and the holiness that makes us different. And sometimes the person says to himself, do I have that spark in me to do that? Do I have that fire in my soul? Can I unleash that and turn it into something very productive in my Torah, in my mitzvahs? And I wonder, I feel overwhelmed, I feel inadequate coming to these young men alone. How do I do it? Let me tell you two stories, and with that I'll finish. The word tells us in the Zohar, After Zayin, a Maisa that maybe some of you know, or perhaps the interpretation will be interesting to you. The Maisa of Eliezer ben Dodoi. Eliezer ben Dodoi, as the Gemara says, was a big Baal Aveira. There wasn't an Aveira in the world that he didn't do. And there was one set of Aveira that he was going to do, and he had to sail the 7 seas, Oba Shiva Nahoris, in order to do that Aveira. And when he got to the place, and they told him that you should know, Eliezer ben Dodoi, you have lost your Olam Haba. You will not get Olam Haba. Eliezer ben Dodoi thinks for a moment, not Olam Haba. I'm going to lose all my Olam Haba for this world. What did he do? He went up between the 2 mountains, put his head between his knees and started to cry. And he said, Holy voice, big Shulai Rachmim, mighty mountains and cliffs, beg for me. And the mountains and cliffs said to him, we have to beg for ourselves, because when the world comes to rest and to an end, we will be destroyed too. We have to beg for ourselves. Shamayim v'oretz bikshul arachmin. Heaven and earth, be mispal for me. And then heaven and earth told him the same thing. We can't be mispal for you. Chamol levona, the sun and the moon bikshul arachmin. And the sun and the moon told him the same thing. Kechavim v'zolos, the stars and the Kechavim, the galaxy and the Milky Ways, you be mispal for me. And they told him, we can't be mispal for you either. What did he do? He put his head between his feet and he started to cry. Until he passed away. Rabbi, when he saw that, he began to cry and he said, there's a person who can tell ganz Olam haba in 1 second. Not only that, he was a Rosh his whole life, and the Baskal called him Rabbi. Yotza Baskal, Rabbi ben Dodoi, is Mezuma l'chayim, my boy becomes a Rebbe, and eventually you have to understand. Tosis asks the question, was he talking to the mountains? You know, if you talk to the mountains, somebody will question your sanity. You talk to the mountains, you talk to the stars and to the moon. And the answer is, says Tosis, he didn't talk to the mountains. What he did was, he was thinking to himself, if the mountains could speak and I can beg them to help me, they're so great and mighty, what would they say? Nochapshat is he was talking to the Sara. We know everything on this world has a malach in heaven that maintains us, that lets it live, and that gives it the koyach, and therefore the kedusha that it has, and therefore we speak into the malach. But the question is a different one. The blessed ben Adoi, you sinned. You did the Aveira, then you have to reap the consequences of your actions. What do you want from the hills and the hilltops and the mountains and the cliffs? What do you want from the heavens and the earth? What do you want from the sun and the moon? What do you want from the stars and the galaxy? It's your Aveira, not theirs. Where do they come into your Aveira? Says the Drash Ve'in, Rabbi Levine, Nat Lewin's grandfather, the Reish Elul, it says in the Sefer, at the Drash Ve'in, a very interesting concept. And he says the following. Everyone doesn't want to feel that he did something wrong. And he always looks for a scapegoat, for an excuse. Now, blessed ben Dodoi, when he finally heard that for all his Averis, he's not going to have Elul Haba, he began to excuse his life of delinquency, his life of lust and Averis, in different ways. And the first thing he said, Holy voice. You know what our voice represents? It presents the mountains, but the Torah tells us, as still it says, Esa ena lahorim al tikru horim, elahorim, home voice are your mighty progenitors. Those are your parents, your grandparents. And as you know, anybody who's taken Psychology 101, the first excuse is, my parents. My parents. They didn't give me the chinuch, they didn't give me the upbringing, they didn't do for me the right things. And unfortunately, children think that parents are always guilty, not knowing that parents are their source of sustenance and their source of greatness. And the biggest lie is, you see how some people cling to their parents and grow, and others unfortunately use them as an excuse, and that's what the Blessed ben Dodoi tried to do. And therefore his answer was, you're old enough to understand for yourself. You're old enough to take responsibility. Don't blame your parents. They have their own lives. They have to take care of their own things. And this is not something that you can blame them and you can just leave us alone. Next thing he said, Shemayim v'oretz bikshul arachmin. Heaven and earth. What does heaven and earth mean? Heaven and earth means my location, where I am. You know, there's an influence on people on the location that they are. People in Yerushalayim, L'man Tildu B'nei Hashem, they see Kahanim, Levim, and Kedusha.
they become great people. Unfortunately, people come to other places where the influence is not correct. And the Rambam says, if you're in a place that you have an evil or a terrible influence, run away from there, build walls around you, and don't allow that to permeate through all and penetrate through all the walls and fortification that you have around you to keep your Kedusha and Tahara. And therefore he says, I was here, I was there, and I would influence them all over. Shemayim Voletz. And the Shemayim Voletz said, don't use us as an excuse. Take responsibility for yourself. And then he said, Shemesh v'yareach bikshol arachmim. You know what Shemesh and Areach symbolizes? U'mimeget fu hashomesh. Says the Torah Nazinu, u'mimeget ger shelochen. It symbolizes influence, affluence. We know that things grow from the sun and things grow because of the moon. He said, Vayishmen Yeshua v'yibod. I had everything in the world. My yasa ben shelo yechta. I couldn't control my impulses and inclinations because everything I needed was there. I didn't have to work a day for anything. I took everything for granted. And therefore, I had no akar to anybody, especially the Rabbi Shalom. And therefore, I'm the way I am. And the answer is, again, this is no excuse. You have to take responsibility of yourself. Was always big the stars and the galaxies and the Milky Way, the stratosphere, ionosphere, everyone being spelled for me. And they told him, what does that mean? That means, I was born under a different star. I was born under a star that caused me to do it. And unfortunately, some very, very different and deviant kinds of behaviors today are trying to be justified by this kind of a logic or an illogic. He was born under the certain star. And the Gemara says, Taka, if you're born under the star of Madim, you're going to be a Ratzeach. But what's the answer? You are responsible for your own moves and for your own actions and for your own doing. As you know very well, the Yechim boys, it says in the Masechta Kedushin that Moshe Rabbeinu looked in his face as if he was the worst person in the world. And when they took a look at him, they said to themselves, the big choizer, the big seers of the stars, and said, Moshe, how could you be this great person who saved Klal Yisrael and took him out of Golos when Lakom Yisrael to Moshe, when you look according to our information and intelligence as the worst person in the world? He said, you're right. I was born with the worst inclinations, says Moshe Rabbeinu, but I worked on it. And the answer to that blessed Ben Adoy was, don't blame your mazel, because if you're a shalom mazel, that's nothing to do with your mazel. You have to be over your mazel. A Jew is not controlled by his mazel. He controls this mazel, as Avraham Avinu was told by Rabbi Shalom. Get out of your mazel, your head and the top of your mazel, and therefore you have no terrors. And when he heard all that, the lesson was in Adov Elul. Look introspectively into your heart. Take a look at that fire, that thing that you have cultivated. Make it flucker. Bring it out of you. You have the power of your hand to do it. He put his head between his feet and he said, my head should have been directing me, but my heart, my inclination did, and therefore I put my head on the bottom, my heart on top. Yotzo Basko. Abasko went out and said, Rabbi Elazar ben Dodoy, he's a Rabbi. He's teaching us something that we may have not known before, and somebody teaches you. Afilo Oisa'acha, says the Mishnah, knows you're mechuyev to mechab him as a Rabbi. And therefore we think to ourselves sometimes, it's overwhelming, we can't do it. Just look and find that spark and bring it out in you. The Elazar ben Dodoy said, Ein adov Elul bi. And let me tell you the last story that happened with me in Poland. I went to Poland last year and I met a young, interesting man. His name was Matisyo. You may have read about him, you may have seen, I think he was featured in the army because that into the army was with me there also. I remember talking to him for a while. And Matisyo tells me the following story. Until he was 15, he didn't know he was Jewish. He had a Goyish father, and his mother he didn't know was Jewish, and his grandmother was there also with him. But later on, when he found out that he was Jewish, he approached his father, and his father had no problems with it. You want to be a Jew, be a Jew. I don't care. Very nice, beautiful. His mother was terrified, mortified. A Jew, don't say anything. victim of Hitler's Holocaust nebuch. Years later, 68 years later, she's still afraid to show herself as a Jew, afraid that the Goyim will come and kill her. I went through that experience once before. She said to her son, don't identify yourself as a Jew, chas v'sholem. And they lived in Babiv, in Galicia, as we know, of course, the Babiv Chassidus that came running there before, after the Milchama, came running to America. But that one Jew, who nobody knew was a Jew, was there. And then he took a look and thought to himself, now I understand what my grandmother did. My grandmother used to bake little biltelach every Friday, and she said this was Jewish bread. And nobody knew what this was all about, and she sold it. She used to shecht her chicken herself. She didn't have shchita. Used to shecht it and used to be boiled herself. And she taught me Jewish, but she called it Deutsch because she didn't want people to know that we were Jewish. That's how scared they were. And this Matisyo was mamish a yid, a tzaddik. One day he comes home, and his mother, when he came to the Babiv, he had to wear dungarees, he had to wear a cap, he had to put his tzitzis in. It was a different type of a person. Unbelievable. The tfisa that person has, and the rachmonis that the Eish has, and Klal Yisrael bringing out, and the tzortzis HaKdoshos, bringing back that neshama that would have been lost forever. He says to me, you know, Poland is a little community of Jewish people, but there's a huge Israeli embassy. So every time the consulate and the head of the embassy, ambassador comes, they come to the shul. Whatever little Jew they find, they make a conversation with him. So they found him, and they said to him, I don't understand you. How is it possible that Orthodox Jews don't want to go to the war, to the military? How don't you understand that our might protects the state of Israel? Don't you understand what it means? If it wasn't for us, we would long be gone. Look at the Holocaust that happened here in Poland. And this boy, this Balchuva, didn't know that he was Jewish until he was 16. This is when he was about 19, 20 when this conversation took place. He says to him, Adoni ambassador, my heart ambassador, my master ambassador, I don't understand what you're saying. He says, we are the Torah. Our Torah protected us for 3,000 years. Your Tzahal protected you for 65 years. You want me to leave my Torah that protected me for 3,000 years and go to your Tzahal to protect you for 65 years? I'm not going into the issue here, which may be a hot topic button item. That's not my whole concern here. What I want to bring out is how the understanding of the depthness of what it means, a boy who understood what it means, Torah. Torah protected us for 3,000 years. I should leave that for someone who's protected me for 65 years. Let me tell you the end of the story. The end of the story comes in one day, and his mother says, Matisyo, hold the Matisyo, you can put on your yarmulke, and you can take out your tzitzis, and I'm very proud that you're a Jew. Ma, what happened here? Well, let me tell you something. In Poland, they're crazy about klezmer music, about Jewish music. When they come, when some of our artists, our big chazanim go there are thousands and thousands of goyim, which I'm now questioning if they're really goyim, or unfortunately lost souls of Jewish people who come out and listen to it and want to hear it. I remember my wife had somebody who worked for her. She was singing Mordechai ben David nicer than anybody else was. Of course, I didn't hear it, but my children told me about it. How wonderful it was, the way she was singing, and that's what they were crazy for. The biggest thing you can give them is send them a cassette or a disc of something of klezmer music. And she was listening once, and she heard the song Rachem. And she Googled it, is Google Translate, as you know, and she listened to the words, and she loved it and fell in love with it, and it touched her heart, and it opened her heart, and that little spark began to glow and grow until she said to her son, yes, we're Jewish, we're open Jews. I'm proud of you. I want you to go to your yarmulke and your sisters out here in Babiv. Could you imagine? Shweki is giving a concert in Nassau Coliseum, and some Yiddish kid in Poland and Babiv who doesn't know that even that she's Jewish, and if she does know, she does concealing it and doesn't want to make it public, gets affected. It opens up. Everyone has it. You know, there's an advertisement. It started in 1958 for the Esso station, and it said, put a tiger in your tank. And that tiger gave Esso such publicity that till today, it became one of the greatest companies in the world. I don't know if you have stocks in it or not, but it's doing good. If you don't, you should buy it. It's unbelievable. It's strong. Why? Because that puts your tiger in your tank. People want to feel they have the tiger in their car with them, the protection, the strength. Shoita, there's no tiger in your tank. There's cheap gas in your tank. That's all that you have. Yet, could you imagine? People are thinking, get inspired with that. What about us? We don't need to put a tiger in our tank. We have a spark within us. All we need to do is reveal it. All we need to do is glow it and blow it and make sure it comes out to that big fire. And you want to know how to bring that out with mitzvahs and masim tovim like you do here. The main group, opening up your houses for tzedakah, for Torah, for tefillah, by Sagodu, when a person comes in to the 5 towns and he's looking for the big house, he can't find it because every house is a big house here. And not only a big house physically, but a Bayis Sagodu that the Gemara and the Torah calls a big house. And as Rosh Hashanah, my sister-in-law says, and with pillars there too. There are pillars that hold up the world, that hold up this house, and everyone can do it. Kibesi based tefillah, yikor l'chalamim. The inyan of ben adam l'chavira, that's so important. Actually, it's ratzas chaveirah. The gewaltige chusim that you have not only for yourself, but for Klal Yisrael. And the ben adam l'mokam anir l'doidi li. Me and my God, personal time. Rabbi Shalom, I beseech you, I ask from you, I request, and you answer. Komu v'Hashem shomea, and the Eibishter listens. B'kol tzalosim yitzirim, so the Lord shall help him. Gesinnt and nachas and agite you, and I see the Torah. Amen.